Let's step into a small Pittsburgh bakery on a Tuesday afternoon. Warm yellow light inside, soft rain washing down the window. A woman stood at the counter. Before her sat one chocolate cupcake, topped with a single white candle. Her bank card declined 3 times. She offered a faint smile, preparing to leave. Daniel Hayes stood behind her. Without even making eye contact, he dropped $3 single on the counter. He only said one sentence: "Everyone deserves a birthday cake." Fighting back tears, she thanked him and left. The next morning, Daniel stood inside the Whitmore Capital boardroom. The doors opened and the CEO walked in. It was the same woman. 2 years earlier, Sarah Hayes passed away on a Thursday morning at Allegheny General. She had served as a dedicated social worker at the Hill District Women's Shelter for 11 years. The breast cancer took just 10 months and nothing more. She wrote Daniel a final letter just a week before she stopped writing completely. The closing line read, "Don't stop building for people who cannot build for themselves." That very same month, Daniel walked away from his principal architect role at Hartwell and Reed. The senior partners pitched a paid sabbatical, then a part-time setup, and finally a remote role. He politely thanked them, but rejected every single corporate offer. Lily was 6. She needed her dad at 4 o'clock every single day. Now they shared a 2-bedroom apartment in Lawrenceville, tucked right above a hardware store on Butler Street. The old radiator clanked all winter, and the windows always fogged up when it rained. Lily claimed a small corner of the living room entirely for her drawings. Daniel used the cramped kitchen table for his startup work. Tuesday evening, the night before the major startup pitch, that table held pasta and a stack of bound documents 2 inches thick. Lily was 8 now. She chattered away about a classmate who teased her, claiming her beautiful drawing of a horse looked exactly like a dog. Daniel laughed at all the right moments. Once she finally got up to drop her plate in the sink, he turned back to study his pitch deck once more. Sarah's Place. 100 units of affordable housing, located directly on the corner of Center and Roberts. $10 million, his final shot. Let's look at the stakes. If Whitmore Capital said no, his childhood home, the very home his mother left him back in '78, would have to hit the market in January. Wednesday morning, he made his usual stop at that Smallman Street bakery. He had visited for 2 years straight, starting the week Sarah died, when Mike the owner poured him a free coffee and asked absolutely 0 questions. Today, he just wanted to grab Lily a sweet cupcake to surprise her in her lunchbox the following day. A woman stood at the front counter. He only caught her profile from the side. He barely registered it. Her bank card declined and then declined again. On the 3rd attempt, the machine let out that small, sad beep. She whispered something quietly to the cashier, then reached out to hand the cupcake back. Daniel didn't even hesitate. He placed $3 single on the counter, delivering the line exactly as he would to any random stranger. Everyone deserves a birthday cake. He never even bothered to look at her face. He had a massive pitch meeting to catch, she murmured, "Thank you," her voice cracking just a bit. He gave Mike a quick nod, grabbed the second cupcake being bagged for Lily, and stepped out into the rain. At Whitmore Capital, the front receptionist sent him straight up to the 14th floor. The corporate waiting room smelled of expensive coffee and cold finance. Daniel sat waiting, pitch deck resting on his knees. Tucked inside his jacket pocket, folded tightly into a tiny square, was a handmade card Lily had given him at breakfast. You see, it was just crayon stick figures holding hands. "Good luck, Daddy," written in green ink. Daniel touched it through his pocket. The heavy double doors opened. He stood. First through the door was a tall, silver-haired man flashing a fake corporate smile that bypassed his cold eyes. Marcus Cole. Daniel recognized the name, but standing just behind him was the very same woman from the bakery. She froze, just for a split second, but long enough to notice. Daniel stayed completely still. Marcus remained completely clueless. Marcus pointed to the furthest chair at the table. "Mr. Hayes, take a seat. You and I know money builds walls." Inside were 12 chairs, half-drawn blinds, and a massive walnut table. Daniel kicked off the startup pitch he had practiced for 30 straight days. He skipped over his own ego entirely. 30 seconds on his firm. 3 minutes on the Hill District, 2 minutes on what the community lost back in 1958, dedicating the rest to his actual architecture design. He walked through the clean unit layouts. the bright morning windows and shared courtyard. A ground-floor community space designed to open right onto the busy street during the warm summer months. He showed the financial projections last, putting human connection before money. Modest but solid numbers, 8% return over 15 years with realistic square footage costs and clear occupancy rates. Smarter than their safe municipal bonds. Meanwhile, CEO Claire Whitmore sat quietly at the head chair. Her hands stayed folded tightly in her lap under the heavy wood, completely hidden. No one knew the truth. The man pitching his heart out 10 feet away had quietly paid for her bakery order just last night. He never asked for any credit then. And he wasn't begging for favors now. His focus stayed locked on his slides, the older board members, and the rainy city streets just outside those blinds. Watch how corporate power operates. Marcus led the question session with perfectly unreasonable trap questions. Exactly how many massive projects had Daniel personally finished as lead architect over the past 60 months? What was his tiny firm's bonding capacity? How would he survive if the city suddenly changed the zoning laws during active construction? Every single question was engineered to make his startup look weak. Daniel calmly handled every curveball without raising his voice. He never flinched. He refused to oversell it. Then Harold Pemberton, the oldest investor in the room, dropped his pen. "Hold on," Pemberton muttered. "Daniel Hayes." He stared right over his thick reading glasses. "Back at Hartwell and Reed, you designed Boston's Riverside Pavilion in 2017. That massive honor award for the Roxbury Community Center the very next year." He took a breath. "I was on the jury that nearly handed you an award for that, too." The boardroom fell dead silent. Claire looked up. Marcus looked completely panicked for a split second before forcing his features into a calm mask. He forced a laugh. "Mr. Hayes is just an independent consultant right now. We're focused on his recent startup portfolio, not what he did at some huge firm 5 years ago." Daniel didn't argue. He simply gave Pemberton a polite nod. "That was a long time ago, sir. Thanks for remembering." At that exact moment, Claire realized 3 massive things. The quiet man sitting across her boardroom was absolutely nothing like Marcus had claimed. He just survived 45 minutes without weaponizing his brilliant past, and Marcus had deliberately hidden it. But she knew none of that mattered yet. The investor pitch packets had been sent out 5 days ago. 6 members already voted. Will a small kindness change everything? We know money talks, yet from her chair, Claire couldn't overturn their cold decision. She signed the devastating rejection letter the lawyer slid her way, keeping her hands perfectly steady. Daniel politely thanked the wealthy board, packed his startup pitch, and walked right within 2 feet of her. He paused just long enough to drop a tiny seed of kindness. "Happy birthday, ma'am." He never met her eyes before stepping out. The boardroom emptied, but Claire remained frozen there. After a long minute, she slowly opened the heavy folder holding his business rejection. Tucked behind the final signature page was something fragile and completely out of place, a folded card. "Stick figures. Good luck, Daddy," scribbled in green crayon. She stared at it for a while. The rain battered his truck the entire drive back to Lawrenceville. Daniel parked behind the local hardware store, letting the engine idle for 10 agonizing minutes. The bank had called him twice during that ruthless board meeting. He ignored them both. He finally killed the engine, just listening to the heavy rain drumming against the roof. Little Lily was already waiting at the apartment door as he climbed the steps. She had been watching from the window. "Did you get the funding, Daddy?" He dropped his bag and knelt down. He had rehearsed this heartbreak in the truck. But the rehearsal meant nothing. He just pulled his little girl tightly against his shoulder. "Not yet, sweetheart, we're still trying." Lily did not ask a single question more. She was 8, not 5. She already recognized the heavy shape of her father's silence. Taking his hand, she gently led him inside to show off a math problem she proudly solved alone. "Now look across the city, to the 14th floor of Whitmore Capital." Claire sat rigidly at her desk, staring down at an entirely different corporate file. Rachel had quietly dropped it off just an hour after the brutal rejection vote. It was Daniel's complete professional resume, the impressive version secretly excluded from the board's packets. Riverside Pavilion, the Roxbury Center, the AIA Honor Award. A Detroit affordable housing project in 2019. 84 beautiful units, finished completely under budget. An MIT architecture degree. Wife Sarah, deceased 2024, one young daughter Lily. Claire stared at the line about his motherless daughter for much longer than she intended. She immediately summoned Marcus into her office. She refused to even stand up. Why was his true portfolio missing from the board pack? Marcus carefully masked his expression. He arrogantly took the seat across from her without even being invited. We standardize all pitch submissions to the last 5 years of active firm work, Claire. He hasn't been at a corporate firm. It's strictly procedural. He runs a sole proprietorship. There is no rule against including past work, but there's no rule for it either. We enforce the very same standard we apply to every single consultant. Claire stared at him for a long, tense beat. She did not trust his answer. She lacked the leverage to open doors that corporate power had completely closed. 8 months into taking her father's 30-year throne, Marcus still held the real power. His name sat on the founding documents alongside Richard Whitmore's. The ruthless board always listened to Marcus because they had known him much longer than her. She nodded. "That will be all," she replied. Marcus finally left. About 20 minutes later, Rachel quietly brought in tea, placing the warm cup on a coaster. She did not retreat. She waited until Claire finally looked up. "Ms. Whitmore," Rachel whispered. Her voice was incredibly soft. "Happy birthday." Claire blinked. "How HR records," Rachel whispered. "Kindness quietly breaks the rules." Claire opened her mouth to speak, closed it, and simply nodded. Rachel calmly walked out, gently shutting the heavy door behind her. Let's step back to that night in Lawrenceville. Little Lily fell asleep on the couch under a blanket Sarah knitted before they got engaged. Daniel gently carried her to bed. He kissed her forehead and lingered in the doorway for a minute, quietly watching his daughter breathe. Stepping out onto the tiny back balcony, he carried a simple glass of water. He pulled the old letter from his wallet. The paper felt soft from years of folding. He read its final line. "Don't stop building for people who can't build for themselves." Looking down at his lap, he stared at a digital copy of Lily's birthday card. The original sat in a manila folder on the 14th floor of a downtown corporate skyscraper. He had no idea how to retrieve it. What he didn't know was that money and power were already shifting. The card sat 3 inches from a CEO whose entire worldview was quietly cracking. Thursday morning, Daniel arrived at the bakery before 7 o'clock. Mike paid him $20 an hour to unload flour deliveries when business was slow. During a tough month, $20 an hour meant survival. Daniel was drowning in bad months. He was hauling a 50-pound sack of bread flour when the front bell suddenly chimed. He straightened his aching back. Claire Whitmore stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her expensive corporate armor from the boardroom pitch. She looked deeply exhausted, an emptiness that sleep couldn't fix. She slowly walked to the counter. She placed something on the wood. It was Lily's card, perfectly preserved in clear plastic. "You and I know Daniel couldn't fathom how this lost card would ever return. He never expected this kind of delivery. You left this behind," she said quietly. "I figured your daughter might want it back." Daniel wiped his dusty hands on his apron. Stepping around the counter, he took the precious card, holding it in both hands in total silence. The bakery owner sensed the heavy mood and quietly vanished through the swinging kitchen doors. Daniel motioned toward a small table by the window. They both sat down. The rain hadn't started falling yet, but the dark clouds above Smallman Street looked completely resolved. "Why are you really here?" Daniel asked. His voice carried absolutely no anger. He was a broken man who had simply run out of energy to fight. "Because I rejected a project I never actually read," Claire admitted. She didn't offer a hollow apology. She didn't say, "I made a mistake." She dropped the usual corporate performance completely. During the long drive, she rehearsed that sentence 3 times, finally deciding it was the only genuine truth left. "Tell me about it," she urged. "No startup pitch, just talk to me." He told her about Sarah and about the worn-down shelter on Wiley Avenue. He explained the women Sarah spent 11 years trying to secure permanent, safe housing for, and how most of those women simply ended up back at the shelter within a year because finding affordable real estate in the city meant accepting truly unsafe conditions. He explained exactly why every apartment unit faced east. He'd read a study proving that natural morning sunlight was the absolute strongest predictor of whether a recovering woman stayed housed past those crucial first 6 months. He built his entire affordable housing development plan around that one scientific fact. Claire just listened closely. She took zero notes and never interrupted him once. When he finally finished, she sat perfectly still, staring at the empty table between them. "I need to review the actual investment numbers," she said, "not the filtered executive summary." Daniel slowly nodded. She stood up, didn't offer a formal handshake, and walked toward the exit. She paused at the door. "Mr. Hayes," she asked, "when you bought my cake yesterday, did you know me?" He met her eyes with pure honesty. "No, ma'am, honestly, I still don't." For a split second, we see her powerful corporate armor totally shatter. For the first time in 7 long months, she actually smiled and truly meant it. She stepped right out into the chilly gray morning. Watching from the window, Daniel saw her cross Smallman Street and climb inside a black sedan. As the car left, the bakery fell dead silent. He stared down at Lily's little card. Mike shoved his way through the swinging door. "Friend of yours?" he asked. Daniel stayed totally quiet for a second. "I'm not sure yet," he finally said. By Saturday afternoon, the sky over Lawrenceville turned a bright gray. Snow was definitely coming by Monday. Daniel was grilling cheese sandwiches for Lily and reading the newspaper when the intercom suddenly buzzed. He walked over to the speaker. It was Claire. He pressed the button down hard. 14, he said. Apartment B. She climbed the stairs holding a startup folder, her hair damp from the rainy walk. That pitch folder was massive. He gently took her coat. His place was so tiny, every single corner she looked at revealed some deeply personal family detail. A framed photo of Sarah resting on the mantel. A long row of architecture books lined up against the wall. A wooden box filled with Lily's colored pencils on the table. He cleared the table. "Watch closely now." They sat down together, and she opened the folder. Page 1 showed the original financial model for Sarah's place. The margins were covered in her red handwritten notes. "The materials cost is from 2019, Daniel explained before she asked. He hadn't even glanced at the main text. He just stared right at her harsh notes. Steel was priced differently back then. He used it because the market was at rock bottom. If you use current numbers, it shifts the internal rate of return by about 70 basis points. In your favor, actually." She slowly turned to the next page. "Occupancy assumption 65%, he said. Detroit hit 91. Cleveland ran at 88. The Cincinnati equivalent reached 86. No comparable real estate project in the Midwest ever dropped below 80, she had written down. He handed over his personal sketchbook, the completely hand-drawn one. His old partner never saw this version. She turned every page slowly. The east-facing windows, the clever placement of laundry rooms on the 2nd and 5th floors. They worked perfectly as informal little gathering spaces. That big retaining wall out back doubled as bench seating for the kids' playground. They worked hard for 2 hours. No cheap flirting from him, none from her either. 2 people navigating a business pitch together, just like 2 skilled surgeons reviewing a medical chart. Totally deliberate and impersonal, yet that coldness created its own weird kind of intimacy. The front door clicked open. Lily walked in from art class, smelling like paint and rain. She froze upon seeing the strange woman sitting there. "Daddy, who is she?" Daniel gently looked up. "Her name is Claire," he said. "She's a friend." Lily quietly considered this. Then she walked right over and placed her brand new afternoon painting down in front of Claire. A little house with a heart-shaped window. "For you," Lily said, "because friends. You and I see it happening." Claire stayed quiet, picked it up and folded it along one seam. She gently tucked the paper into the inner pocket of her coat. Around 6 o'clock, the CEO's phone vibrated hard against the table. She just glanced. Her expression stayed completely blank, but her shoulders tightened. She stood. She slipped on her coat. Pausing by the door, she simply said, "I'll see you Monday morning." Daniel didn't dare ask what that ominous message actually said. He just walked her quietly down the stairs. She drove off into the rainy night. He waited patiently on the sidewalk outside the hardware store until her bright taillights faded completely into the dark. "You and I know that text had come straight from Rachel. Marcus is filing an emergency motion to remove you Monday. He has the votes lined up." The CEO hadn't shown an ounce of fear. Sunday morning arrived bright and freezing. The bakery sat completely empty. Mike unlocked the doors at 7 a.m., usually seeing maybe 4 people before 9 o'clock hit. Daniel sat nursing a warm coffee in the back when Rachel Bennett finally walked inside. They had never formally met. He only recognized her because Claire had mentioned her name twice. He spotted her instantly. She was the paranoid type of corporate player who carefully scanned every single window in the room before even picking a place to sit. She dropped a laptop onto the table. She didn't bother ordering a single thing. "I have about 20 minutes," she told him. "I told my husband I was grabbing bagels. I really hate doing this meeting here. I can't risk going to her office or her apartment. You live above a hardware store on Butler Street that has just one entrance in the alley and one out front. So this humble bakery was the safest option." Daniel stayed quiet, letting her speak. She opened the laptop, spinning the bright screen toward him. "3 things," she said. First up was a leaked email chain between Marcus Cole and someone named David Cole. The timestamps ran from June right until the week before Daniel's big pitch. The subject line focused entirely on that contested Hill District property. Inside, the messages detailed a massive luxury condo development planned for that exact same lot. One specific ruthless sentence in David Cole's reply immediately caught his eye. "As soon as the Hayes thing dies, we move on it." The second item was a side-by-side scan. "Let's look closely here." Daniel's real financials bearing his signature placed right beside Marcus's forged version given to the board. Daniel's legitimate data for materials, occupancy, and absorption rates had been maliciously manipulated in 11 different spots. None of those deceptive changes were minor. The third piece of evidence was an internal email Marcus fired off in 2020 to a retired partner. It contained one glaring, incredibly vindictive line targeting Daniel directly. "Hayes turned me down on the Riverdeck Casino 5 years ago, sent a holier-than-thou rejection letter. I haven't forgotten, David Cole is his cousin," Rachel calmly explained. "He never disclosed that connection on the corporate conflict forms. I checked the records myself last night. It's completely blank." Daniel sat speechless. You and I can imagine that shock. He reread the documents carefully. Finally, he looked back up at her. "Why are you bringing this evidence to me? Why not take it to the CEO?" Rachel had her answer ready. "Because if I go to her, Marcus will pull the security logs showing I entered her office. He'll claim she ordered me to leak it. That completely destroys her credibility with the board. But if I give it to you and you deliver it, your name secures that strict chain of custody. It becomes a verified whistleblower tip from an outside party. That's a different legal angle." Daniel finally understood. He understood she spent her week planning because simple kindness had finally reopened those locked corporate doors. "Your mother," he whispered. Rachel simply nodded once. He'd threatened her by leveraging his powerful friends at her mother's care facility. "I moved her Tuesday. My brother's covering the bill now. Marcus has absolutely nothing left to weaponize against me." She shut the laptop. Because of one simple kindness, she didn't even ask Daniel's next move. She stood up, walking out into the cold, harsh sun on Smallman Street. Daniel just sat there for 10 minutes. Then he grabbed his phone, calling Claire. That afternoon, the CEO and the struggling father met at a Squirrel Hill coffee shop, miles away from their usual worlds. He handed over the laptop. She read the files for 20 minutes. Her expression stayed frozen. When she finally shut the lid, her eyes remained completely dry. What she felt wasn't grief, it was pure resolve. "Monday," she stated. "Board meeting. Be there. I'm not on the formal agenda, but you will be. Let's step inside Whitmore Capital together." By 9 on Monday, the boardroom was packed. Marcus had spent his entire weekend aggressively working the phones. He locked down 6 votes to oust Claire as CEO, planning to raise the formal motion under new business at the very end. He wasn't nervous, just annoyed that this cost him time. At 9 sharp, the double doors swung wide open. Claire marched in. Right behind her, trailing by 2 steps, was Daniel Hayes. And trailing Daniel came Harold Pemberton. Seeing this unexpected trio, Marcus immediately stood. "This is a closed corporate session," he snapped. "Claire, what exactly is this?" "Mr. Hayes is present as a material witness," Claire replied calmly. Citing Bylaw 7.3, she dropped 3 bound dossiers, sliding them across the mahogany table. The corporate board opened them up. For 25 straight minutes, Claire held the floor. She never raised her voice once. There was absolutely no theatrical performance. She guided the executives through the exact financial model that got altered before researching them. She displayed the authentic signature page, right beside the completely falsified second version. Methodically, she revealed all 11 fraudulent changes one by one. She slowly read 3 emails between Marcus and David Cole aloud, including that brutal line about making the Hayes startup die. She presented the empty conflict of interest form, then read a 2020 email regarding the casino. Marcus stayed dead silent for 8 minutes. By the 9th, he finally broke and interrupted. "These documents are stolen," he spat out. "This is a desperate coup by an incompetent CEO about to be fired. You all know what's on the formal agenda. You all know exactly why we are here. You and I know how dirty money works." He eyed his bought votes, naming 2. "Tom, Bill, you know my record." Then he named a 3rd. "James, your father and I built half this firm, yet 2 of those 3 men refused his gaze." The 3rd guy, Tom, just stared down at the damning papers in front of him, never looking up. Daniel hadn't spoken. He just waited until the hostel room became completely quiet. And then he finally spoke. "Sir," he said, addressing Pemberton directly while completely ignoring Marcus, "I did not bring these to you simply to be vindicated today. The startup project is what it is. It gets built or it doesn't. I brought these because 68 women are waitlisted at the Wiley Avenue shelter. They deserve the absolute truth about why a project designed to house them was ruthlessly killed. That is the only reason I came. I'll step out now if you prefer." But he didn't move a single inch. Nobody dared ask him to leave. Pemberton placed both his palms flat against the mahogany table. Addressing the room, he declared, "I officially move that Mr. Cole be suspended immediately, pending a full independent forensic audit by an outside firm not currently on our vendor list. I further move that the Sarah's Place startup review be reopened immediately under Miss Whitmore's direct oversight, ensuring those original financials are fully restored." The motion was seconded. The vote went 7-4 with 1 abstention. See what happens when humanity outsmarts greed. His 6 became 4. Marcus stood, slowly buttoning his jacket. As Marcus walked past Daniel toward the exit, he paused for just a split second to mutter something privately. "You don't know what you've done," he whispered before walking out. The corporate board didn't adjourn for nearly an entire hour. When the wealthy executives finally filtered out, Claire just remained frozen in her chair. Beneath the mahogany table, the CEO's hands shook. She allowed it for 1 second, then forced absolute composure. Daniel walked down to the corporate kitchen, returning with a simple glass of water to quietly set before the powerful woman. No strings attached. He didn't speak, and she didn't offer any verbal thanks either. Picture this. They simply sat together in that quiet boardroom for roughly 3 minutes. Outside, the rain started pouring down again. Exactly 2 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon, an independent forensic accounting team delivered a 140-page investigation report directly to the Whitmore board. The findings confirmed everything Daniel exposed. Proving truth holds more weight than raw corporate power. Marcus Cole's stock options were completely voided. His golden parachute was frozen, pending a massive SEC investigation that had officially launched the Wednesday prior. That same Friday, David Cole's real estate firm cowardly withdrew its bid for the lucrative Hill District land. Just 4 hours before the damning financial report went public, the Sarah's Place community project was officially greenlit by the executive board that next Monday for $10 million. With honest financials restored and a solid 26-month development timeline securely in place, Claire skipped the flashy press conference. Instead, she signed those approval papers privately, using Rachel as her only witness. The following afternoon, Daniel sat opposite her at that intimidating walnut desk on the 14th floor. He wasn't desperately pitching. He wasn't facing a financial emergency anymore. He was carefully reviewing a contract. The business terms were immaculate. Lead architect, total design control, 0 clawbacks, no tricky clauses, and a heavily front-loaded payment schedule. All because this CEO understood the brutal cash flow a struggling father actually survives on. She had carefully crafted every single line. He signed the document, then set his pen down. Claire finally spoke without even lifting her eyes from the corporate paperwork on her side. "We have a principal architect position opening," she mentioned quietly. "The salary is fantastic. There's a comprehensive health package that would fully cover Lily. I'd like you to consider it." Daniel grabbed the pen once more, thoughtfully twirling it between his fingers. He set it back down. Ms. Whitmore. Claire. He let her first name hang in the quiet room. I appreciate that more than I can say, but I left a corporate firm to be home for her at 4 every day. I'm not ready to give that up again, not yet. She simply nodded. She didn't push. She honestly hadn't expected him to say yes anyway. But making that lucrative offer was necessary, because withholding it would have betrayed the genuine connection they shared. He slowly stood up, grabbing his worn winter coat from the back of the leather chair. He walked toward the exit, resting his hand firmly on the brass doorknob. The Sarah's Place groundbreaking is October 17th, she noted, her gaze still fixed firmly on her desk. She still wasn't looking his way. I'd like Lily to turn the first shovel of dirt if that's all right with you. Daniel's hand lingered on the brass knob. He didn't even turn around. He fully understood she was keeping her eyes down on purpose. She was giving him space to react naturally, letting his pride soften without needing to put on a brave face. She'd love that, he whispered. He pulled the door open, stepped through, and shut it gently behind him. You and I know how pride works. Claire didn't look up for a full minute, then she finally did. Sitting there was his rejection file, proof that simple kindness can pry open tightly bolted doors. You and I know power's cold, she kept it, unsure why. She pushed it across the heavy desk, letting it fall into the recycling bin below. Pacing to the glass, her 14th floor executive office stared coldly out over the Allegheny River. The water matched the gray sky, a heavy barge drifted slowly down the current. She didn't even smile. With her power, she didn't have to. The boardroom was dead empty. October 17th was a quiet Saturday morning. Out in the Hill District, the sharp cold made every single breath visible. Center Avenue's trees were still mostly green, though the maples over by the school were just starting to bleed red at their very tips. About 80 people arrived, families from the Willie Shelter waiting list seeking affordable housing. District 6's city council member was there, plus a local Post-Gazette reporter. Even Mike from the bakery came, wearing a sharp coat Daniel hadn't seen before. Pemberton stood in a gray scarf, leaning heavily on a cane he didn't need 2 months ago. Daniel wore his black wool coat, the exact same one he'd worn to that brutal startup pitch rejection in September. Lily stood right by his side, bundled in a red parka. She gripped a tiny ceremonial shovel. Mike had actually carved the handle just last night. The kid had been practicing her big moment with it for 3 whole days. Claire took her spot at the front of the small crowd, no fancy podium today. She held one single paper but never glanced at it. Her speech barely lasted 30 seconds. We almost lost this project, she admitted, because someone forgot what we're actually building. Daniel Hayes never forgot. That is exactly why we are here. She never looked his way while speaking. He just stared straight ahead, listening quietly. The CEO pointed to Lily. The girl marched right up to the bare dirt marked off by wooden stakes. She stomped her tiny boot down, right on the shovel's edge, exactly how her dad practiced with her on their cramped balcony all week. She pushed hard, the soil turned. She scooped it out, placed it gently on the tarp, and spun back around, her whole face lighting up with a massive smile. The crowd erupted. Daniel rushed over, crouching down to pull his daughter tight against his dark wool coat. Over the next 30 minutes, the gathering slowly faded away. People warmly shook his hand. Strangers who hadn't even known him 3 months prior stepped up to shake hands. Pemberton patted his shoulder firmly, telling him to build another one of these projects somewhere else soon. The journalist asked for a quick quote. Daniel offered the exact same words he'd told Claire inside that bakery back in September. We're trying to make sure the morning light hits the right side of the building. Once the crowd cleared out, the CEO finally walked over to him. In her hand, she carried a simple white bakery box. Watch this moment with me. She knelt before Lily, offering the little box. The girl took it, glancing up at her dad for permission. He just nodded. She popped the lid, 1 chocolate cupcake, 1 white candle. Lily stared up at Claire. Is it your birthday? It was, Claire whispered back, a little while ago. Lily pondered this, wearing that deeply serious frown an 8-year-old saves for major life matters. Then she slowly lifted her finger toward the unlit candle. She tapped the tip, pretending to spark a flame with her very own bare hand. Make a wish, the girl demanded. Claire shut her eyes for 2 solid seconds. She wasn't faking it for the kid, she genuinely made a wish. What do you and I learn? Her eyes opened, drifting past the cupcake, locking straight onto Daniel's. You see how kindness reopens closed doors. They looked away instantly. Lily missed it. Wind swept the lot. Far off, a heavy hammer struck a roof 3 blocks away. 6 months later, an April Saturday morning. The steel framing for the first Sarah's Place building reached 30 feet above the Center Avenue sidewalk. The structural bones of 3 more affordable buildings were laid. The struggling neighborhood had begun expecting their progress. A weekend coffee cart opened across the street, simply because the busy construction project crew tipped incredibly well. Daniel remained a solo freelancer. He kept his independent setup, but a massive newspaper article exposed the real estate project and the ruthless boardroom backstory. His phone had been ringing ever since. 3 separate affordable housing developments across Cleveland and Akron, plus 1 in Detroit, all desperately waiting for him to commit. He held off on firm dates. He cherished keeping his Saturday mornings totally free. That very morning, he brought Lily straight down to the Strip District. They parked past the produce terminal, walking 4 blocks over to Smallman Street. The little bakery sported a new awning. Mike's business boomed. Lily sprinted toward the counter. She pointed at a chocolate cupcake topped with a single white candle. Mike smiled, sliding it onto a small plate without ever ringing up the cost. Daniel placed 3 $1 bills down and pushed them gently across. Mike pocketed the cash silently and turned. The bell above the door suddenly chimed. The powerful CEO stepped inside. She froze upon seeing them, but Lily was already running. Claire knelt to catch her tight hug. Daniel still had his back turned. He grabbed the plated cupcake, walked right over, and held it out toward her. "Happy birthday, Miss Whitmore." She stared at the pastry, then his face. "It's not my birthday." "I know," he replied, "but I never got to celebrate the last one with you properly." She accepted the plate. Lily tugged her expensive sleeve. "Sit with us." They settled at the window table, the exact same spot they shared back in September. The spring rain felt light and warm, and the soft April daylight had begun lengthening the way it always does. They barely spoke a word. Lily finished half her cupcake. Daniel sipped black coffee. Claire stared out the bakery window, watching the intersection of Smallman and 21st. She focused on nothing, just the wet asphalt reflecting the dull gray sky above. She rested her hand on the table. Daniel's was already waiting. Money didn't matter now. Their pinkies gently touched, not gripped, just resting lightly against each other like loose paper. Neither person dared to move. Lily kept chattering about some little girl from her class. Neither adult tracked a single word, though both managed to nod at all the right intervals. The pinky of Claire's right hand and Daniel's left remained perfectly still, anchored together near the wet window. The warm April rain fell softly. Back in that corporate 14th floor boardroom along the wall. Buried inside approved startup project files distinctly labeled for Sarah's Place, sat a folded crayon card featuring stick figures and the words, "Good luck, Daddy," written in green. You and I know she placed it there herself. Neither went looking for this genuine, unbought connection. And that is exactly why they could finally trust it was real.